Live. Hello, everyone. This is Mel here from Islamic Origins, and this is Lloyd De Young. Welcome back, Lloyd.
Thank you, Mel. Great honor. I mean, I was watching your shows back in the day, and you were the legend, you were the guy running there, and I was just a viewer. Now I'm on the talking with you, which is a great honor.
Well, actually, I feel the same way about you. There's a line in the Gospel where John the Baptist says, "I'm not worthy to undo the strap of your sandal," kind of thing. So I kind of feel very much like that. So it's a mutual admiration society we're having here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, everyone, what we're looking at today are two topics. We're going to start off with the origin of the Aisha myths, and I'm pretty adamant that's what we're dealing with, despite the fact that I think a lot of people think she's a real individual. But I'm going to go into why I think she is a myth, and the implications of that for all the hadiths and so forth. Then we're going to take a shot at explaining the whole Zamzam well issue. Now, Lloyd, you did a live stream with Reasoned Answers. I think was it a week ago, something like that?
Yeah.
And you broke some amazing details about the origin of that, and I can't wait for you to go through that again. I'm going to add a little bit to it in terms of where I see the origin of the name. So hopefully we'll have a well-rounded picture by the end of this show. So let's get cracking here. I'm going to start sharing one of my slides here, and I'm just going to actually just confirm that you can see it. Okay.
Looking good.
Okay. So I'm going to look at the Jewish origin of Aisha and Fatima mythology. Primarily, I'm going to be focused on Aisha. So I had to look this up because I couldn't remember, but way back in 2020, I'm just trying to hide this here. Way back in 2020, I wrote a song, got it produced, called Retroversion Row, and it was basically a spoof on the whole revisionism that exists in Islam. Ironically, we're called the revisionists, but actually, I believe Islam is the real revisionists. So it was about Aisha here in this part of the song. Though her existence is doubtful, at least some think so, she's a useful device for retroversion row. She's a useful device was kind of an insight I had, that she was an individual that was very useful in retrofitting Islam by putting words into her mouth and creating hadiths coming from her. What do you think of that notion, Lloyd, just straight off the bat?
I would agree with you. I don't find a reason to disagree that many of the characters in Islamic stories are devices, as you said. In fact, there's a Gnostic term for it. It'll occur to me in a bit, but it's the Gnostic allegorical method.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. Right. So, if it turned out that she is just an ahistorical but useful device for certain hadiths, then it puts the whole hadith collection under suspicion of fraud. I know this is going to be a bit of a shock to you, Lloyd, the idea that the hadith collection might be attempting fraud. What do you think of that?
I am shocked.
Yeah.
Because it's called Sahih. I am assured that these are sound and authentic.
Yeah. Hadiths are authentic. Yeah, it has got the stamp of approval. Yeah.
I mean, but there's even a hadith from Aisha where she says to Muhammad that it is you who pretend to be a prophet from Allah. I mean, I don't want to call Aisha a liar now would I?
Yeah, they can actually put a hadith into the collection for the doubters, and so there's something in there for everyone in the audience, essentially, all the different points of view. So it's a very useful way of keeping the crowds happy. But according to this, just a quick search I did was that apparently about 2,210 hadiths are attributed to her. Okay, so if it turns out that she's actually a fiction, then what does that make of those hadiths? Obviously, they would be fictional, which calls into question all the rest of it, especially because each hadith is meant to have like a chain of narration going all the way back. So if it turns out that her chain of narration is fictional, then presumably all the rest are as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that probably these characters are a pastiche or a composite. They may be derived from a legitimate historical person, but then they've also accreted a certain mythical personality, or they've taken certain character traits, qualities from let's say the Mother Mary or from Jesus, and they've glommed them
Yeah.
onto this character.
Yeah.
So you may have
Yeah.
started with an original character, but
Yeah.
you've certainly got this embellishment.
Yeah.
And for instance, I mean, I mentioned this hadith, which is actually a legitimate, authentic hadith. Once Aisha angrily said to the Messenger of Allah, "It is you who pretend to be a prophet from Allah," and that's a genuine Sunni hadith.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is, if you look at I mean, this could be very embarrassing. So why
Yeah.
would they include this? This must be a real personage that said this, and yet obviously they will overlook this and then go to this mythical idea of this person.
Yeah. I do like the idea of a pastiche. I think that's a great way of explaining it. And there are probably traces of real people in these hadiths, but they're also very useful centuries later to create a backstory as well. So it's very hard to know where the foundation lies in all of this. So the Jerusalem Targum. Well, what are we talking about here? The Pseudo-Jonathan, the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. It's actually misnamed. Its correct title was originally Targum Yersu. Yeah, so I'll try it again. Yersu Lami, the Jerusalem Targum, which is how it is known in medieval times.
Yerushalmi, you mean?
Oh, thank you. Way better. Because of a printer's mistake, it was later labeled Targum Jonathan in reference to Jonathan ben Uziel. Okay, so with that out of the way, okay, so that's the correct name of it. Let's take a look at what we'll continue to call Jonathan Targum Pseudo-Jonathan from here on in, just to follow the
Have you started
standard
your
way.
slideshow? Because you're showing the first page, just the title page, and you
I
haven't.
have. Yeah, it's not working too well, is it?
Yeah, I'm just seeing the maybe reshare it again, but
okay, yeah,
that's what I'm seeing. I don't know what the audience is seeing.
Right, so that isn't working. Let's try it again.
The second page is showing now, or there's a proposal page, but
okay, let's try it again. Yeah, so just tell me in as soon as you see any problems. Let me see. No, how's that?
Okay, I'm seeing it, but I'm seeing the slide previews with the thumbnails on the left and the page showing proposal Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, but it's not the full screen. It's
not the full screen. Okay, let me try something else.
I mean, it works like this if you just zoom into these, just Control plus or Control mouse up.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're. I'm just looking to see what you're seeing. So let me just try something else. I'll just try different idea. Sorry, everyone. I'm a technophobe. What can I say? Okay, I'm going to try Microsoft. No, it doesn't work.
Took me forever to get this stuff right. I mean, so many errors on my streams. Still do.
Yeah. And you look there. No?
Seeing the same screen. It's just the
Okay, do you know what I'll do? Can you, if
you zoom in, it'll be much better. It'll be fine like that. That's actually
okay. Is it okay?
To me, it looks just fine.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go with it. I'll go with this. So, right. So, let me sure I've got covered everything in there. Yeah. Okay. So, the proposal is that the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan is a 4th century AD Jewish Targum that mentions Aisha, possibly Aisha, and Fatima as the wives of Ishmael, thus proving, if the dating is correct, that this is another of countless harvestings of Jewish sources by Islam to build its own mythology. The relevant passage found in the Targum can be broken down into its Hebrew text and Pseudo-Jonathan components as follows. Okay, so Genesis 21:21, HT stands for Hebrew text. He dwelt in Pharan, married an Egyptian whom his mother brought him. And then in the extra part, which is the expansion, he first married Aisha, put her away, then married Fatima, whom, and then it's ... Now, the reference to PJU, well, obviously Pseudo-Jonathan, the U refers to the unique material found in Pseudo-Jonathan. There is also other parallel interpretive material in other Targums mixed together in this Targum. So what the author that I'm going to be looking at, who's let me get her name here because I forget, Beverly Mortensen. She basically looked at the Targum and said to herself, okay, what's different about this Targum to other Targums? And she found that what was unique about it was a focus on the priesthood, okay, the Jewish priesthood. Now, so if that's the proposal, that it's a 4th century Targum, what is the contrary to that? So what are people saying against that notion? Donald Splansky argues that Pseudo-Jonathan arises in the 11th to 12th century. He bases this on conclusions that PJ derives from Onkelos, that sons of Ishmael and sons of Esau found in PJ means that the world of the Targum was Arab versus Christian, thus post 7th century, and that Pseudo-Jonathan's calendrical understanding could only occur after the Jews refined their calendar, which followed translation into Arabic of Ptolemy's Almagest in 829 to 30 CE. Okay, so that's the challenge. And so she responds to those challenges. So our solution 1 is, as Fletcher observes, that understanding of an early 1st century CE proto-Onkelos allows for a Pseudo-Jonathan inclusion of Onkelos's language and methods well before the 600 CE date of the Onkelos we have today. So there was a proto-Onkelos which allows for the existence of a particular type of Aramaic in the text. Okay, so that's our first solution. The response then, on the contrary, scholars agree that PJ contains 3 types of Aramaic, including Jewish literary Aramaic. Up to now, the presence of Jewish literary Aramaic in Pseudo-Jonathan, a dialect that was only found in Onkelos 600 AD, has caused scholars to posit Pseudo-Jonathan's dependence on this late Targum. So they're basically saying, we can only find this Aramaic in this particular book, which is very late, 600 AD. Therefore, it cannot come from the 4th century. It seems like rock solid evidence, except they're assuming that there were no other texts around with that particular Jewish literary Aramaic. So how she responds to that is, she says, however, the discovery of 1st century 1QAPGN, which is a particular document, also in that particular Aramaic, calls the old thesis into question. Fletcher, drawing upon Kutcher's 1957 suggestion of Proto-Onkelos, a 1st century text in written JLA, proposes that Pseudo-Jonathan derives from this text rather than the late Babylonian version of TO. Okay, Fletcher's thesis maintains that priests wrote Proto-Onkelos in Jerusalem. The GLA they used also appears in 1st century Jerusalem. Osiri inscriptions, Qumran writings, and the Bar Kokhba letters. A literary language, it required a structure of support and an education system for its dissemination. The GLA appears until 135 AD in the extant literature. Let me see if I can hide this out of the way. Thoughts of that so far?
I'm not very familiar with this, so this is just something that, but basically you're looking at so in other words, there's no sound basis for any scholar to reject, if I get this correctly, to reject the hypothesis because they are not entirely certain about the origination of this or the dating of the text, and it could well have come from an earlier source. So the later sources, like an 11th or 12th century source, may well be a reflection of earlier sources. I know of one such situation where, which I was discussing in my discussion on Gnosticism in Islam, or the early antecedents, where there's like an 11th century source that is quoted, but it is known to come from a 2nd century source. But it took some time to discover that it came from a much earlier source, so it predates
Yeah.
And so therefore the scholarship, and also I think there's also a lot of scholarship that wants to protect Islam. There's a
Absolutely.
certain,
Yeah.
and so therefore they tend to take a tack that defends Islam, and they take this view that generally would provide some sort of cover to Islam. So from what
Yeah.
I've seen of the scholarly work,
Yeah.
so what I'm saying
Like,
is that you've got evidence that cannot be overlooked, should be examined, and may well support the thesis
yeah.
that this is much earlier than otherwise maintained.
Yeah. Like, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the 4th century as a potential hypothesis, um, it makes sense that there would be more documents, books, whatever you might call manuscripts, that exist from the 1st century, right, than the 20th century. So scholars, or the 21st century for that matter. So scholars are looking at it from the perspective of the 21st century. They don't have too many extant manuscripts from the 1st century or the 2nd century or whatever. And because of that scarcity, the only one they can, up to recently, they could only point to was the one from 600 AD. And
Mhm.
on that basis alone, that one scrap of evidence, they are jumping to the conclusion, well, therefore, this writer must be only using the 600 AD one not because of any particular copying of lines or anything like that. It's just the fact that the grammar is of that kind, which is preposterous, especially considering that you have the same type of dialect on funerary inscriptions, Qumran writings, and the Bar Koshba letters, in other words, from the 1st and 2nd century. And I'm sure there would have been a lot more manuscripts if you were to go back in time. So yeah, I think she's on solid ground there. I think it's foolish to assume just on the basis of limited access to ancient documents
Mhm.
that in the 4th century you wouldn't be in a better situation. Of course, you'd be in a better situation. You'd have way more chance of having access to what the priests of the 1st and 2nd century wrote, especially if you are from the Kohen group, the priestly class. You'd
Mhm.
obviously have kept access to manuscripts, even if there was a massive calamity like the temple being destroyed. Those that did survive would have escaped out of Jerusalem and brought what they could with them, including precious manuscripts. So I think the assumption is presumptuous, let's say. So I think she's on solid ground. So she goes on to say, after the destruction of the temple and the exile of the priests from Jerusalem, GLA no longer was maintained, and dialects even took over. Flesher posits that JTA I think these are different Targums, derives from the spoken Aramaic of 2nd century Galilee. Hence, the priests carrying Proto-Onkelos into Galilee reworked it into new Targums using the spoken language of the time and place, JTA. They not only translated but inserted useful extra material, often a moral lesson derived from the passage. They added legends and favorite extras that tradition had associated with the stories. We could include in this category stories about Aisha and Fatima, for example.
Mhm.
Okay. So another point that's made is that juxtaposing Ishmael and Esau follows Pseudo-Jonathan's pattern of building up apostate types into even greater emblems of wickedness. Pseudo-Jonathan seems to pursue a priest-centered agenda which praises conformity with the law, tradition, cults, and points up the characters who defied even these unifying ideas. This work shows how Ishmael and Esau end favorably by repenting and by returning to the fold, a conclusion that negates the idea that the Pseudo-Jonathan compares them with Christians and Arabs. So I think that's a good response to that second issue. And in relation to the third point, the solution that she offers regarding the calendrical evidence, Pseudo-Johnson's author could have read Ptolemy's ideas in the original, doesn't have to be the later translation, deducing the divisions of the day on his own or with other unpublished thinkers. So essentially, the conclusion of Mortensen is the door remains open for the conclusion of this work that Targum Pseudo-Jonathan was published by priests in the 4th century as a handbook for their profession. The following chapters present the evidence. So I thought it was the way I've ordered this is basically to look at the challenges first before kind of looking at our evidence. So, you know, we're kind of looking at both sides. I wonder, have I... Okay, there's one little further challenge, which is, this is like a corollary. Some scholars argue strongly for a dependence of Pseudo-Jonathan upon PRE, which is Perke de Rabbi Eliezer. Eliezer, sorry. Most scholarly opinion places PRE's editing at the 9th century. Furthermore, recent thinking places it as late as the 16th century for its first publication. So this is obviously quite a tough challenge. Let's have a look at Perke's passage. Okay, so Genesis 21:21. Ishmael sent for a wife from among the daughters of Moab, and Aisha was her name. Notice that it's in this one is Aisha, whereas in the other one is Adisha. After 3 years, Abraham went to see Ishmael, his son, having sworn to Sarah that he would not descend from the camel in the place where Ishmael dwelt. He arrived there at midday and found there the wife of Ishmael. He said to her, "Where is Ishmael?" She said to him, "He has gone with his mother to fetch the fruit of the palms from the wilderness." He said to her, "Give me a little bread and a little water, for my soul is faint after the journey in the desert." Okay, so the key thing there is we can see that in this text, which could be from the 9th century or the 16th century, if the scholars...
8th century, I think. I just had a quick look.
Yeah. I think one date I've seen was 830s. But in any case, this is quite a challenge because, you know, if you're arguing that Pseudo-Jonathan is based on this, then it would post-date it if that conclusion is correct. So this is how she responds to this. True, there are a good number of parallel passages, but there is no evidence of which way the dependency travels. Pseudo-Jonathan could just as easily have published these stories and traditions that PRE later gathered. And this is my little bit to it. It makes more logical sense for Pseudo-Adisha, okay, then Aisha, and then Aisha in that order, than the standard Islamic Aisha, then Aisha. I'm trying to do the say the Aramaic or Hebrew version of it, and then Adisha. I think it makes more logical sense that it happened in this order than the other one, which presumably is what the modern scholars think happened. In the context, supposedly, of Islamic influence, why change it away from Aisha to Adisha? That to me makes no logical sense. If you're going to go and copy the Arabic contemporary view, why not just stick to Aisha in Pseudo-Jonathan? Why go all the way to change it to Adisha? I don't think that makes sense. Plus, sorry? Go ahead.
Something I was thinking, something I was looking at today. There's a thing called the Bauer thesis. A man called Walter Bauer, German scholar. Have you heard of him? German theologian.
Oh, no.
So exactly. A lot of people haven't heard of the guy. Now, of course, there are certain scholars that push his ideas, even if they don't realize. But one such famous scholar is, of course, who's that Christian scholar that was a Christian, is now an atheist or agnostic? Well-known, publishes all these books about the errors in the Bible. Bart Ehrman,
yeah.
So Bart Ehrman and certain others who are part of his group that push the certain idea of the many varied Christianities, like Orthodox Christianity was just one of many Christianities. Now, what is interesting is when you start to look for the source of an idea, right? And once you uncover the source, you start to realize you can then start to take that idea apart, because it's one thing to present an idea, but once you uncover its historical origin. So scholars invested a lot of time, and this Bruno Bauer did invest a lot of time in trying to place the Christian scriptures after the Gnostic scriptures, after the heresies. Now he spent a lot of time and effort, and the thing is, Bart Ehrman and others like him, many other scholars today, push this idea. Maybe they're not aware of it, but the fact is that scholarship had an invested interest in trying to undermine Christianity And now
Yeah.
I've looked at some papers today where actually they show that this guy's thesis is obviously false. But back in the 1830s, whenever he was talking, people didn't have that evidence. So now you've got scholars who would want to try to benefit Islam, let's say, and in terms of Judaism and Christianity, they were, if not outright hostile, at least they weren't, shall we say, positive or friendly.
Yeah.
So this inversion of the dates. I mean, you've got here where this guy Bruno Bauer went out of his way to try to claim that all that Orthodox Christianity came later after the heresies, and that
Which
all of these
makes
other
no
Christianities
sense.
was the original belief, and
Yeah.
they were correct. And the truth is obviously the exact inverse. But this guy, as a theologian, so I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we dig into some of these and see what is the motivation of the scholars who write some of this, because I've really come to question some of the scholars.
Yeah. I do think there's a certain demonic element of this inversion of truth. But that's, there's a darker side to it beyond just the scholarly bias, because it takes a lot of malice to actually knowingly mislead the public in that way, to kind of say black is white and white is black, But just carrying on from there then, she goes on to say that most agree that the work is a compendium of traditions from earlier times. All this makes it impossible to determine the direction of influence between Pseudo-Jonathan and PRE. Passages which find rabbinic parallels simply show common interest in selected ideas. Pseudo-Jonathan's selection arrangement of the material remains unique. So you can't argue that it's just a copy of the other. It has its own unique passages. So going to move on now to her case for why Targum Pseudo-Jonathan is 4th century. So we're just about 10 more slides. So it's not we're over halfway here. So this study shows that Pseudo-Jonathan differs from the Palestinian Targum tradition represented by Proto-PT in two main ways. It is 2.8 times larger, and it speaks to priests about themselves and maintaining the cult, while Proto-PT speaks to ordinary individuals about their keeping Torah. So it's a very special Targum. It's unlike any of the other Targums that exist. So there must have been something special about this. So this is my little bit. A focus on the Jewish priesthood and temple practices only makes sense in the context of a realistic prospect of rebuilding the temple, of which there hasn't been any since the occupation of the Temple Mount by the Arabs since the 7th century. This is the bit I think that scholars have a blind spot on, that they don't get that. Why would anyone write a Targum which is by priests, for priests, in relation to what they need to do when they set up the temple? And they think it happened after the 7th century when there was zero chance.
I was just about to say that makes no sense. If you're talking about a handbook for priests, you're going to have to go much earlier in history when the priesthood was actually active.
Yeah.
At least in that context. So that makes, that's a very strong argument.
I think it is, especially how weak the other arguments are. They're those three arguments that we saw, they're very tenditious, assuming on the basis of one document that there was no other document or manuscript that they could have got the particular type of Aramaic from. So that, that's another issue with it. Okay, so she goes on to say, I consider that the writer is a priest and that he writes exclusively for priests. With this as a primary consideration, we turn to the matter of dating. No study has identified and considered the streams of material as this book has done. This effort has isolated the unique offerings of the Targumist, some original and some culled from ideas that were passing around. It is these topics and ideas that are organized and summarized in the body of this book. It is these unique expansions that we propose to place in time. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the different categories, but you can pretty much trust me. I might do a video on that at another occasion if people would like. But basically, when she went through all the different categories, they are all about the functions of the priesthood in the context of the temple. So it is pretty obvious when you look at the material that you're dealing with a priestly handbook. Come to the next one.
So until what century? You just need to determine as to when they were active in the priesthood.
Yeah. So we'll kind of come to that in a moment. So the key question that she poses is, when in the time after the completion of the Torah, century BCE, would a writer embark upon an ambitious translation of the Hebrew Pentateuch that addresses an audience of priests? The question concerns opportunity, motivation, and expectation. So 3 things there. It's very well put. So first of all, you need to have the opportunity to do this. They need to have a temple. Needs the motivation. I don't think they would have the motivation to put this together if it wasn't a realistic opportunity. And they also had to have an expectation that this was going to happen. So there needed to be a solid level of confidence that this was going to happen for them to put all of this work in, because this wouldn't have been a light bit of writing. This would have been quite heavy going, time consuming as an exercise to put all of this together. So Mortensen has chosen the 4th century as the date of its writing, given the choice between the 4th century or 9th century often offered by scholars. So most scholars say it must be either the 4th or 9th century. She says, we make this selection based on the rationale for writing a massive work directed at temple priests. Why would anyone undertake such an effort if he had no hope of a temple? Of the 2 eras, only one offers such a hope, the 4th century CE. I'm copying her format of saying common era, but obviously I would have gone for AD myself. A short-lived expectation for rebuilding the temple arose during the reign of Emperor Julian 361 to 363. He wrote a letter promising such a feat shortly before his death. Word of his intention had likely circulated since the beginning of his reign, allowing time for Targum Pseudo-Jonathan to rise. Any thoughts on that one?
That makes sense. I mean, looking at that, I'm not as familiar with this as you are, so I'm trying to catch up as we go. But it makes perfect sense. I mean, this logically makes sense, which means you cannot simply dismiss it as an argument, which means that there is the clear possibility to go in the other direction. And this evidence wasn't presented before, so now you have to follow the evidence. You can't simply assume that, well, we have to go with option B because now there's option A. And you can't simply just wave a hand and throw this throw this evidence out.
Do you remember offhand when Emperor Constantine reigned? Was it the early 300s? Would that be
330s around there?
Yeah, or 330. So
I mean, if you look at the Council of Nicaea, that was 325. So he legalized Christianity within the Roman Empire just around about that time.
Yeah. So what happened subsequently is that Rome had become Christianized, but then Emperor Julian comes along and he basically is a pagan, and he wants everything to go back to the way it was. So he's still living within living memory of the pagan times that had existed. Obviously, Christianity wouldn't have completely got rid of all the pagans in the empire. He wanted to roll things back, and he got a kind of a dark joy out of potentially proving the prophecy of Jesus wrong, that the temple wouldn't be returning in Jerusalem. That's the idea behind this venture. So at this time, the temple had been destroyed for 291 years. The new emperor, rumor has it, talks of rebuilding the temple. Even though his plan satisfies a grudge against the Christians, his action functions as a real boon for Jews and their cult. The author, in preparation for the temple's readiness, plies his efforts to ensure that an eager and well-prepared priesthood stands ready to conduct all the ancient rituals. So you can imagine if you were from the priestly class still in existence in Palestine or Israel, which you would say, "Oh God, this is a great opportunity. We need to get a manuscript together so that we know what we're doing when the temple reopens." That
would make sense as well. It's logical to I think conclude that.
Yeah. So she says we propose a scenario. Targum Pseudo-Jonathan's expansions from a scholarly group which had split from one of the rabbinic schools at, say, Sepphoris. How do you pronounce it? Sepphoris. Sepphoris or Tiberius. These scholars hold a particular interest in the priesthood. Probably they are themselves Cohens.
Yeah, your audio is breaking up, Mal. It's like your voice
Oh,
sometimes comes out a little gobbled.
let me try that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
Okay, I'll try to go over that again. We propose a scenario. TBJ's expansions arise from a scholarly group which has split from one of the rabbinic schools at, say, Severus or Tiberius. These scholars hold a particular interest in the priesthood. Probably they are themselves Kohens. Many Kohens, since the Second Temple's destruction, laid as ordinary people with no place to perform sacrifices. They no longer acknowledge their inheritance, their entitlements, their cosmic purpose. Leadership lies with the patriarchs, prestigious Jewish
Mal,
leaders.
you're breaking up badly again. You're actually breaking up very badly.
Any-
Yeah, it's like you even the video is lagging. There's like some sort of issue.
Yeah,
Maybe I can read this. Let me just read this
Yeah.
in case, because the audience is noticing it as well.
yeah,
The slide that I'm seeing right now, at this time, the temple has been destroyed for 291 years. The new emperor, rumor has it, talks of rebuilding the temple. Even though his plan satisfies a grudge against the Christians, his action functions as a real boon for Jews and their cult. The author, in preparation for the temple's readiness, plies his efforts to ensure that an eager and well-prepared priesthood stands ready to conduct all the ancient rituals. So that would make some sort of sense, yeah. So that's what I see right now, Mel. And if you've moved
okay,
on,
yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
there's still some,
There's,
yeah, your connection, the upstream connection is definitely having an issue.
yeah. Do you know what I'll do? If you just hold on for 2 seconds, I'm going to just set up another internet connection here. Just take a second. Okay, let's see. I think just the internet is just weak. Let me just hope. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah, I think is that better now?
You're gonna have to just chat for a little bit. It's still not
Yeah.
100%, but close enough.
Yeah. Okay, so the Cohens occupy an uncertain position. Let's just move on here as we wrap up this one.
Maybe I can read this because I was breaking up.
Yeah.
I can see it now. We propose a scenario. So maybe I'll just read it because it's clear.
Okay.
Just go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You see it okay?
So, yeah, we propose a scenario. TPJ, that is, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan's expansions arise from a scholarly group which has split from one of the rabbinic schools at, say, Sepphoris or Tiberias. These scholars hold a particular interest in the priesthood. Probably they are themselves Kohines. Many Kohines, since the Second Temple's destruction, lived as ordinary people with no place to perform sacrifices. They no longer acknowledge their inheritance, their entitlements, their cosmic purpose. Leadership lies with the patriarchs, the Nese'im, prestigious Jewish leaders, not priests, with connections to Rome, who supervise community and synagogue and regularly collect the half-shekel temple tax from all Jews in Palestine. Rabbis begin to hold sway in synagogues. Kohines occupy an uncertain position. Okay, so they were starting to gain some level of authority and organization. So this would be time for them to make their move, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Julian becomes emperor of the Roman Empire in 361. He cares little for Christians, so exhorts the Jewish leaders to return to the ancient sacrificial worship. They protest that they must have a temple according to their law in Jerusalem. He gives them money to do just that. The pagans help them, for building the temple would disqualify Jesus' prophecy that the temple will fall. He puts this in writing: "Pray for me that after the Persian War I may rebuild the holy city of Jerusalem, as you have desired it to be restored, and therein will I unite with you in giving praise to the Almighty." Considering he was a pagan, that was pretty cynical. And then he goes on to say, or as our author goes on to say, in this atmosphere of hope for reinstitution of sacrifice, these scholar Cohens undertake to resurrect the profession of the priesthood in a fresh way. They translated the Pentateuch, They underline all relevant passages, repeating them where possible, and where they find fertile ground, they insert current ideas and their own insights. As with all Targums, they make no indication of interpolation or sources, allowing the entire Targum to serve as the translated word of God. They appoint a final editor who fashions the document into the smooth text we have today, hence the single Targumist referred to above. So what happens next is the death of Julian in 363 dashes the immediate hope for a temple, but perhaps not with the finality that our retrospective view imputes. Only history guarantees that some other emperor does not re-galvanize the temple building. The Targumic shapers complete their work believing that the priesthood, now regathered and redefined, must never fall into disuse again. Pseudo-Jonathan's priest-centered society is not so different from the Mishnaic society. Both worlds look inward, ignoring the wide swathes of external events that history records. The great kingdoms, wars, and ideologies which swirl outside hold no relevance for the powerless societies of Mishnais and Targumist. And what I thought there that was relevant here is that Islam didn't influence this Targum, but rather Islam copied its ideas for its own much hackneyed religion. So
Okay, that's
essentially,
interesting. Because on that point, I just thought you're using the word Targum, and I wasn't sure what it meant, but it says it's an ancient Aramaic paraphrase or interpretation of the Hebrew Bible of a type made from about the 1st century AD, when Hebrew was ceasing to be a spoken language.
yeah,
Which is very interesting because the Quran is often a very loose paraphrase of the Bible.
yeah,
And of course, Aramaic has a massive influence on the Quranic texts, as we've
yeah,
discovered the last
yeah,
couple of years. I mean, we know Aramaic and the Quran go hand in hand.
yeah,
And so you've got this loose paraphrase because the Quran doesn't have orthodox biblical information. It's got myths, it's got legends, children's bedtime
yeah,
stories, fairy tales, Gnostic heresies, you name it.
yeah,
Anything but orthodoxy. So that kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
yeah. You could actually construct the original Quranic text by just simply inserting the Hebrew text before each of the expansions, at least in parts of the Quran. So what you have in the Quran is the expansions without the original Hebrew text. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like they're alluding to a story sometimes in the biblical text, but actually without recalling it. Whereas in the typical Jewish Targum, they would have the Hebrew text followed by the expansion, wherever the expansion kind of adds to the story or fills in the gaps. So I think all of this makes a lot of sense. I particularly like the idea that this kind of makes sense to me, that actually the Jews wouldn't give a damn what was going on in the outside world. They didn't want to copy the Christians and their ideas. They didn't want to copy Muslims. They were just sticking within their own tradition, a bit insular maybe. That kind of disproves the scholarly idea that they were influenced by Islam. Everything we've seen up to now suggests that it's Islam that copies Judaism, not vice versa.
I
I've
would,
yet
I would, yeah, I wouldn't buy that story for a minute.
the idea the other way that
That the
scholars
Jews
say.
would copy Islam. I wouldn't buy that for a minute.
No, I just think they're too far above that, So in conclusion, then, the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan and Perky de Rabbi Elzier, is that right?
Eliezer.
I definitely
Or
need
Eliezer.
elocution lessons.
Oh.
Both predate Islam's clumsy rewrite and expansion. PRE was written at a time when Islam was beginning to write its own origin story in the form of Ibn Hisham, if we can trust the 830s date with that, and there's question marks even if it's as early as that. It could be a lot later than that. However, as it was a compendium of earlier traditions, we are still on solid ground in asserting it came before the Sen. So I think we're pretty much on solid ground with all of that. It seems like the Pseudo-Jonathan came before Islam, and Islam is basically plucking the name Aisha supposedly married to Ishmael, and then Fatima, the idea of Fatima being married to Ishmael, and then basically taking these two characters. And what's interesting, if you look at the characters of Fatima and Aisha in the Islamic tradition, they're both viewed as young girls. They're almost like mirror images of each other. There's kind of a weird kind of similarity between the two characters, in my view. And they thought they could get away with borrowing these characters and no one would notice. But they're trying to make Muhammad, whoever Muhammad is, be just like Ishmael. And how do you make Muhammad like Ishmael? Well, give him the same wives, or at least some of the people like Muhammad. So you have Aisha. Let's give him a wife called Aisha, just like Ishmael. They probably thought of making one of his wives Fatima, but they thought, oh, that's too obvious. Even where everything we've done so far is obvious, this might be a step too far. I think they probably went, maybe we'll just make Fatima his daughter instead and just change the story for her. And then what they have is an expansion on that story, and what happens next is an expansion upon an expansion upon an expansion, and that's all the hadiths are, just expansions on expansions. And the stories are kind of standalone stories with no sense of history. They're plunked into a mythical Hijaz where there's lashings of water, supposedly in the 7th century, long before they actually built the aqueducts to fuel a population. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I'm looking at something here actually. So I'm looking at a book called, I'll go back here. So I've got a book written by one of the major scholars of this particular literature, especially it's called C.T. Haywood, Charles Haywood, Targums and the Transmission of Scripture into Judaism and Christianity. And he actually discusses, I did send you a link to this book in the past, and he says there is the effort by scholars today to try to make this particular document later and later. But he says, and I'm just looking at this as you were speaking, but he says here, so there's certain arguments that scholars have made, but this guy, he's one of the top scholars in this, and he doesn't quite buy this. And he says there are other appreciations of Pseudo-Jonathan's character and origins. And he says 25 years ago, Geza Vermes, Geza, and her surname Vermes, argued that much of Pseudo-Jonathan's Aggadic tradition was essentially ancient, even though there were indications that the text had been modernized with the passage of time. He suggested that it might have been based on an original Targum very similar to, or possibly identical with, the forerunner of Pseudo-Jonathan. So she's arguing, or he's arguing, for an even older document. So there were obviously documents change. Like these are myths, these are legends, these are stories. They change a little bit over time.
Yeah.
So to some degree, his argument is based on Pseudo-Jonathan's language, which by turns agrees now. So hold on. And after thorough analysis of the language, okay, so the scholars, there's by no means a consensus, and there's evidence that is simply being dismissed or overlooked. So there's no way to necessarily explicitly say, look, this is the only interpretation, because there's certainly, you've got other authors, other scholars that stand opposed to that idea. Now you've got this one, and so I think there's reason at least to say, look, here's evidence. We cannot simply just wave away with the wave of the hand.
I think some scholars have behaved as if it was case closed. You know, we've met our case. It's a late manuscript. And they do it in the absence of, some of the discoveries that were made more recently. For example, of the 1st century document with the particular style of literary Aramaic, which is found in Pseudo-Jonathan. So I think we've got a good case for the idea of it being 4th century. This is no surprise to me, because I've been arguing for years that Aisha just sounds like a fictional character. I remember reading the whole of Al-Bukhari, going through every single hadith, probably the most boring 3 months of my life. And somewhere after a few pages into it, I thought, this doesn't sound remotely like a historical document, This is like I'm thinking, how long ago would this have been? This would be 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, when I was reading Al Bukhari, and it never occurred to me that actually it might be just made up. But when I was reading it, it just felt like I'm reading like a really bad fictional novel, where the details of the story just don't seem to have a kind of a sense of reality to it, But I think this just confirms that suspicion for me.
Interesting. There's a discussion here. I could all be wrong. Can I just share my screen for moments? At least the audience can just see
Absolutely,
the
yeah,
book that I'm referring to.
yeah. Please do.
But they mentioned Philo. Philo lived in the beginning of the 1st century. So I'm just going to jump to the beginning so everyone can see the book. This is from Brill. It's
Yeah,
C.T.R. Hayward, Targums and the Transmission of Scripture into Judaism and Christianity.
it's funny. The book cover is exactly like the one that I
Oh,
have on the Targum as well. It's a
okay,
different
because
different
it's by
author, but
Brill.
yeah,
It's
yeah, Brill
Studies in
book.
the Aramaic Interpretation of Scripture.
Yeah,
It's by Brill.
yeah,
So it's one of their works. And
yeah,
so yeah, this is very interesting. So just that so that the stuff I was reading is around page 127, 126, somewhere on there.
yeah,
And yeah, it's just that there's more here than one would otherwise think.
yeah,
And I mean, if it brings up characters from the 1st century, then there might be that could be evidence that these ideas have been around a long time.
yeah,
And this book is addressing some ideas that come from much earlier. These are not 8th century ideas or 10th.
yeah,
So just something to
and
keep in mind that they are
yeah,
speaking of this here.
yeah. I would
Um,
expect that the origin of these characters and stories go way back, which gives you plenty of time for stories to add legs, and grow into
yeah, here's the
all
passage that I said
different
here. This
ways. Yeah,
Vermes was
yeah,
essentially ancient. The text had been modernized. This is page 126. If you go to
yeah,
the PDF reader itself, it's page 127.
yeah,
So there's something to be said here. So I mean, if you keep the thing is that what I've discovered is that it's not that the evidence doesn't exist; it's that someone never bothered to go look for it.
yeah. That's it.
So if you've got your blinders on, you're not going to find it anyway if you're not looking for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sometimes just keeping the status quo is more important for some people, particularly scholars in academic institutions that are being funded by the Saudis and so forth. They obviously don't want to risk losing their grants and so forth. So why would
Yep.
you say anything controversial?
No, I mean, I did a
So
show. I did a talk on the funding that goes into universities and how and this definitely influences what comes out of the universities.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
there's definitely something going on there.
Okay. So I think to conclude this part, I think the Aisha story can be traced back to the Jewish Targum. What do you think? Just leave your comments below. So in the second half, we're going to be looking at the Zamzam well. So maybe I'm going to hand it over to you for a while, because you brought up something quite exciting there a week ago in relation to where you think the story of Ishmael and what's her name, Hagar, running back and forth to get water, and they just all of that story that we've heard a million times over. Do you want to talk us through that? So give you a
Yeah,
chance to
sure.
open
Let
up.
me run through
Yeah,
that very.
yeah,
So hold on, I can share my screen. Actually, I'll just.
yeah,
Yeah, I've only got like 21 slides on this, and then I brought up some other documents on that, but I'll figure those out when I get there. We'll
yeah,
jump off that bridge when we get to it.
yeah. Okay,
Okay, there we are. Yeah, it's busy
yeah,
sharing now. There's about a
cool.
20-second lag on the stream, more or less.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wonder
Um,
why mine didn't work. My end. It must have been the internet connection or something.
who knows? Or you could have been choosing the wrong window because it's very difficult. No, I share the entire screen. I don't share a window because with PowerPoint, even if you share the right window, it doesn't always show it. It shows
Yeah.
the PowerPoint previews, not the actual slideshow.
Ah, yeah,
And so I share the whole window. I don't share. I share the whole screen.
yeah, yeah,
I've learned that it doesn't work very well otherwise.
yeah,
Okay, so on this point, um, with the idea of borrowing from Jewish and Christian sources, I was discussing the Cathisma Church. Now I spoke with Odon recently, oddly enough, and he's like, look, well, Cathisma actually means this, and the association with Moses means that, and I mean that's not irrelevant, but it's not relevant to this point that because Muslims didn't really necessarily care what something meant. They didn't necessarily understand. They would just grab it because it seemed good, and they would jam it in there, right, to make their soup.
Yeah.
And what the mystical meaning was for the Jews isn't necessarily what Muslims understood about it. But the fact is that I think they needed to borrow certain elements to justify their religion, which they wanted to parallel with Christian beliefs. And as we know, that in the early period, Christianity was still somewhat Jewish in its expression. There was a very strong sort of messianic Jewish flavor to it, rather than necessarily strictly Christian flavor, which developed over some time. And so the Cathisma Church. Now, this obviously, the Cathisma Church, it means the seat. Now, within the Bible, there's the tale of Mary and Joseph. They're walking, and Mary gets very tired riding on the donkey, and she needs to sit down, and she sits down on a rock. And this rock is supposed to be a rock which is about 4 kilometers from, it's halfway between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. It's outside Jerusalem on the road, quite literally on the road to Jerusalem. And so this rock is supposed to be a particular rock, which was the site of the Cathisma Church. Now, the Cathisma Church was built in 456, which is 5 years after of a particular council, which, well, we'll get to that. But prior to that, it seems that this particular rock or this particular site has a well. It definitely has a well. It had drawn, and also it's within the Old Testament. It's also a very important site. So it's got long-standing history with a very strong attachment to the Old Testament, to the Jewish tradition, and thus to the Christian tradition, and it drew pilgrims, and pilgrims would be guaranteed to walk past this location. So whether this is the specific rock or a rock 200 meters down the road, who knows? But this was the rock that was chosen as the one where Mary sat down. This is supposed to be that rock. Now, of course, we don't know for sure which rock she sat down at. I mean, we don't have the Google map pin for that, but she sat down somewhere, right? And this was the place, and it was a site where pilgrims went to get water. But first, potentially prior to it becoming a church and the seat of Mary, it was supposed to be the first, according to at least some scholars, the first nativity site before that was moved to Bethlehem. So, and
just
then,
want to
yeah, sure.
just wanted to point out that you're still on slide 1, so I think it might be.
Yes, I know.
Oh no,
yeah.
Just in case. Oh yeah, sorry, just making sure it was working.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
I know I'm on slide 1, so I'm just giving the story. So I don't.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just in case. No.
Now notice this is from one of my readers on one of the commenters, one of the subs. He says the prominence of Mary in Islam makes no sense because her only claim of significance is that to Christians she is the mother of God. Now, Islam argues against the divinity of Jesus, so why would they continue to revere Mary if not as some sort of theological fossil from their Christian origins? What do you think of that, Mel?
Yeah, there's definitely a contradiction in the focus on Mary. Yeah, I think that makes good sense.
Right, and I
Just
mean,
point
Muhammad
to an
isn't
origin.
born miraculously, although he is in the Sirah, but then
Yeah.
you've got Jesus who is sinless, Jesus born miraculously. It's just kind of like, huh, okay. Now, Shoemaker thinks that the Cathisma was the original nativity shrine, which later moved to Bethlehem. Now, the church was built much later, so Bethlehem then becomes the new nativity shrine, but this place is remembered as a sacred place because hundreds of pilgrims would go past it, and then the church was then repurposed. So in 456, when the church is built, right, it becomes the seat of Mary rather than the nativity shrine, but it's remembered as a holy location. So the location is technically the location is repurposed, right? And it's the first and earliest known Christian shrine in Jerusalem to be appropriated by Muslims. Now, isn't that odd? The first and earliest known Christian shrine. Why didn't they take the Temple Mount? Why this place outside of Jerusalem? Why would the Muslims take this place? It's odd. Okay, so Shoemaker confirms that the Cathisma was the model for the Dome of the Rock, and other sources confirm as well. This church, the octagonal design of this church, was the model used as the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is copied after the style of this particular church. Why would they copy the Dome of the Rock why would the Dome of the Rock be built in the style of a church dedicated to Mother Mary? That makes no sense. Was the dome originally a Marian shrine? Right? And there are at least 5 major connections to this particular site, to this location, historically and with the Old Testament. So this place is a source for Islamic tradition, one that is not created in Mecca, but one that was made in Jerusalem. Because this thing is so rich with history and tradition. And the palm tree in the church that we have here, this palm tree is an Islamic palm tree. The Muslims added this.
I've lost you there.
So this palm tree that was added here, this was added by the Muslims. This is not a Christian design. This palm tree, because palm trees, notice you've got the ajwa dates here. You've got palm trees in the background, and you've got this palm tree, which is also part of the Islamic story, where Mother Mary sits down, right? The tree bends. So Jesus speaks to the tree from her stomach, right? And the tree bends down to shade her and to give her dates to eat, right? Within the Islamic context. And also so the story is that a spring, miraculous spring, breaks out from the rock, from the soil. And of course, there she has water to drink. And this whole story with this thing is that it gives sweet water to pilgrims. Now, the palm tree in the church is part of the Islamic conversion to a mosque. It's an Islamic palm tree mosaic at an ancient nativity shrine. And on top of that, there's a time it was when Muslims and Christians prayed together in this church before the Muslims eventually took it over and made it into a mosque. So just as the multitude of different connections here, your thoughts, Mel?
Yeah, I think that last bit is very significant because it speaks to the idea that Islam and Christianity were an awful lot closer in the early couple of centuries.
Yes.
And actually, a little bit later in the live stream, I'm going to be giving evidence from a Chinese source from 751, which backs up that very point. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting convergence there.
So I'll run through this. So this is my second run through. So I'm still trying to refine all this. But notice this is the design of the Cathisma Church, octagonal, double-walled, with a ring in the middle with the rock. This is the design of the Dome of the Rock from 200 plus years later, almost 200 something, 225 years later, double-walled octagon with a circle with a rock in the middle. And then, of course, you've got the story in Islam where a portion of the rock is broken and taken away. Well, a portion of this rock was broken and taken away as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say there, it just at first glance, obviously I know that this is the Church of the Cathisma, but if someone were to show me that simple image on its own without any labels, I would assume it's Dome of the Rock that you're showing me. That's how close it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So now notice it was once nearly as important as the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, but it was forgotten. It got destroyed and literally covered. Now, isn't it odd? They made it disappear.
Yeah. Well, that's like another skeleton in Islam's closet that they would rather people forget about. So I can totally understand why they would want to wipe that off the map.
I mean, it was found 30 years ago. Oddly enough, it's been like exactly 30 years since they found it.
Yeah.
Since it resurfaced. So yeah. So the southern apse at one point was made into a mosque. Okay. So this is north. So the southern apse, you're looking at this section here, you're looking at a piece over here somewhere, right? Was made into a mosque in the first half of the 8th century. The rest of the structure continued to be used as a church until eventually the Muslims took it over. So somewhere here is a prayer niche, a Muslim prayer niche. So I think it's this piece here. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's that piece here. So there's definitely a connection between Islam and Christianity at this church. And this also confirms some of what Donner says as well. So there's some interesting overlap there. Scholars hold the church was destroyed in 614, but I found at least 3 episodes of destruction in the 800s, in the 8th century. So the 7th century, the 8th century, as well as in the 12th century or 11th century.
Yeah.
Until it was buried. And so it's just odd that the Dome of the Rock is copied after the style of it. So the style of this church was very specific because it was meant to look different to all the other churches because it was devoted to Mary, to the Mother of God, right? So very odd. Now,
Can I just ask before you go into this? Do you know anything about the destruction of the church those 3 times? Whether any time was to do with earthquakes or was by human hand?
I believe they claim human hands. So you got the Persian invasion in 614, when they
Yeah.
took over Jerusalem. Then I think the Muslims might have destroyed it. Then it was rebuilt, and then I think the Templars may have the Templars destroyed it. I believe in the eighth. No, then the Templars may have destroyed it, or it was destroyed just after the Templars were defeated. There's not exactly a clear story there, but
Yeah.
so
Okay.
the Muslims made it the mosque, and the Templars destroyed it, or the Templars took it back from the Muslims. When the Templars left, the Muslims destroyed it. So I'm not sure which story is true
Yeah.
here. It's a bit
Okay.
fuzzy.
Yeah.
But it was definitely buried. It was made to disappear. That's my thinking.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And the church would have had a dome. It's not very uncommon. This is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So this is a drawing from the 14th century. But notice these domes would have been on top of it. This is very similar to the Dome of the Rock. You'd have domes.
Yeah.
So the churches had domes. Notice domes. So the style definitely would have had a dome on top. This is the design with the rock. Okay. So yeah, this is the north entrance, so on. I mean, very much the style of, the Dome of the Rock and the palm tree mosaic. This is the Muslim mosaic here. Right?
Yeah.
And the palm tree is very, very important within Islam. I mean, it's on the Saudi flags and things, the palm tree. And of course, it's within the Quranic stories about Mary. This is the design, a high quality shot here.
Yeah.
Of this. This is the north here. Right. So let's just run. I've only don't have that many slides, but this is now notice this church in Bethlehem, it's not the Church of the Nativity, but it's the Church of the Shepherd. Notice it's also octagonal because it's to do with Mary. So that's really odd. This is a Christian design that the Dome of the Rock stole, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, the number 8 has got a number of significances. I don't want to anticipate anything you're about to say, but this might be part of the reason. One of them is to do with the resurrection, life after death. Another is martyrdom, and the other one is baptism. So I can, within that context of maybe resurrection, I can sort of perhaps at a push, I might say, well, it's to do with the saints and life after death, maybe, and maybe that could link with Mary, perhaps. Not sure.
To be honest, I don't know enough about the subject to comment at this point. I'm going to have to bring up another document, but later. So I'm going to try and run through this kind of fast. So the Theotokos, just so you know, it's the place where Mary supposedly rested on the road to Bethlehem. Now, of course, this is discussed in the Bible, but the Proto-Gospel of James, or the Proto-Evangelium of James, obviously is a source that discusses this in depth, right? And so and the whole story, the whole story around that, all of the, because the Bible mentions she rested, but all of the rest of the story, the embellishment, comes into these early stories, these early apocryphal stories, and of course these stories make their way directly into Islam. So
would that Proto-Gospel of James have been a Gnostic one, or just?
I believe so. I believe it is Gnostic.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, but I mean, we can always look that up. If someone in the comments wants to have a quick look for us, that'll be appreciated.
Yeah.
Actually, someone says, Adi says the rock must have been at the Cathisma Church, then it got destroyed and moved, and the rocks were the current location of the Dome of the Rock moved to the... Actually, no, the rock is still there, but a portion of the rock, they tried to move it to Constantinople or something, and they couldn't. So what they did was they put it somewhere else in Jerusalem, so it didn't get that far. But anywho, so the First Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, so this was when Mary was said to be the mother of God, because there was the whole idea of Nestor where Jesus wasn't fully God and so on. And when finally Jesus was said, look, Jesus is God, and therefore Mary was the mother of God, Mary was rose to importance, right? It settled a major theological controversy, right? That's one of the, and Juvenal was Bishop of Jerusalem. He was at the Ephesus Council, so it was important for them, and the church became extremely important. This church was on the same level as major diocesan churches in Constantinople, in Rome. It was not a minor location, it was a major location.
Yeah. So essentially this was, what's the word? Broadcasting a major doctrine for Christians, which is that that Mary wasn't just the mother of a man, but also the mother of God, in the sense that Jesus was both God and man, and that was something that they had to believe in. Yeah.
Yes. So this church was on the same footing with Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch, the other major stations of the church. So this church was of major importance. It wasn't a minor location.
Yeah.
And then also this church is the source of various. So within the Jewish teaching, there was for 40 days after birth, the woman was considered unclean. She wasn't ritually clean. She couldn't enter the temple if she'd had a boy. So, but this eventually entered into the church as Candlemas, right? Became Christianized, shall we say? And what you have is so this idea of Candlemas starts. So this Jewish tradition enters into this church, and it says this becomes part of the church tradition or the Orthodox church tradition because of this specific church. Again, church that sources certain very important traditions within Christianity. So again, it's not a minor church. It's not a small innocuous little place. It's very important. Yeah.
Can I just throw something in? I just actually saw this 2 hours ago. I was looking at an old video by Odin, and he was recounting what Dr. Robert Kerr had to say about the word Umrah, right? And Umrah means in Aramaic, because it's an Aramaic borrowing, which Muslims obviously treat it as like a minor Hajj, but it literally means to live a monastic life. And Odin mentioned that Umrah has the sense of a dedication or consecration to the temple, right? So you mentioned there about the idea of Mary being dedicated to the temple, or words to that effect. So that has a connotation of Umrah. Do you follow what I mean?
Just say that again, please. Let me just try and follow you again.
So in the previous slide there, you had something about Mary going to the temple. You had the Candlemas. Where is it?
I can introduce the candle procession to mark the purification of the third paragraph.
Yeah, and so it kind of marks the idea of Mary kind of being consecrated in a sense to the temple. Umrah has that connotation of consecration specifically to the temple. And it brings in other kind of concepts of Mary as the Ark of the Covenant because of carrying the Jesus within her. So Umrah might be a reference to this church, Cathisma Church. So this might be a missing piece here. We've got the Hajj, which would have been focused on the Temple Mount, and the Umrah is associated with that church of Cathisma.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, stick a pin in that. I need to have a look into that, see if there are any links or connections, words, phrases, practices, anything.
Yeah.
But that is interesting. So yeah, I mean, look, if it made its way from Judaism into Christianity, and I know there's people. I mean, I see this all the time that everyone's trying to claim that oh man, just to go off topic. But first of all, I see Protestants, and look, I was raised in the Anglican Church, so I'm a Protestant like the rest of you. But I constantly see people making the claim that Catholicism is not Christianity, and I keep seeing that Catholicism started Islam. Please stop. Right?
Yeah.
So if it made its way into the practices of the church of that time, then there's no reason it didn't make its way into Islam.
Yeah, absolutely. The thought as well is that the further mosque that's referred to, or the place of prostration that's mentioned in the Quran, if the Temple Mount is the Masjid al-Haram, then another possibility is that the Cathisma might be the further mosque, the one that's...
that's an interesting thought. That's a very interesting thought, because it was a mosque at one time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a thought now, just as I'm bouncing off your idea. So sorry to keep interrupting you.
No, that's interesting. No, look, I mean, this is how you never know what's going to spark an idea, because man, I've gone down a few rabbit holes and I've come up with gold,
Yeah.
So I don't dismiss ideas necessarily that easily, because you never know what you find if you look, because people don't look. I mean, and you ask questions and you spark associations. And also, of course, this place had a well. Right?
Yeah.
It was called the Bir Kadismu, right? Kadismu. So it had a well, and it's been long known to have a well. Now it's odd that you've got a building with a rock and a well. I know of another place that has a rock and a well.
I just find that place to be.
And then of course, hold on. There's something else. Didn't I just send you something? Yes, I did. Hold on. And let me actually bring this across. So few people might be aware of this, but now we're looking at the Kaaba here. I sent
Yeah.
you this yesterday, Mel.
That's right. Yeah.
They speak of, okay, another relic. This is at the Kaaba, is the Hijr Ibrahim, or the stone of Abraham, which is said was used as a scaffold by the patriarch, by Abraham, when constructing the temple with his son Ishmael. The third object of note is the fountain or well of Zamzam. So hold on, we know about the Kaaba, we know about the well of Zamzam, known called here Zimzam.
Yeah.
But why don't we know about the stone of Abraham that is at the Kaaba? That's also very, very odd. And they say the water gushed out miraculously from this spot as Hagar was wandering through the desert with her son, oppressed with thirst. Well, at the Cathisma, according to the legends, not the Bible, water
Yeah.
gushed out miraculously from this spot as Mary was wandering through the desert, because the biblical passage specifically refers to this place as desert. There is nothing here.
So
And then, of
we're
course,
seeing
yeah,
we're seeing a lovely example of Semitic symmetry here, where Hagar and Ishmael are being associated with Mary and Jesus here.
yeah.
You have that lovely symmetry, and they're kind of taking that story and applying it to a different context.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's my thinking there as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, so now you've got the element of the rock, you've got the element of the well, you've got the element of the miraculous water, the trees, and all that. So it's just odd that, I mean, that this occurs here and then it's copied by the Muslims. And I mean, according to the scholarship I've seen, the idea that this originated in Arabia, no, this came from Jerusalem and was taken there,
Yeah.
right? And it was a church of great importance. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Okay, the water system, the well, was very well known as a holy site all the way up to the last century. Okay,
Yeah.
so, and this is the place here. That's Jerusalem in the background there. This is the view.
Mm.
This place has been leveled. Okay, the design is very much with the stone pillars of the Kaaba, of the Dome of the Rock, and all of that. This place is mentioned in two 6th century documents, right? So it's well
Yeah.
known.
Yeah.
And Theodosius, I don't know if this is the Emperor Theodosius who legalized Christianity, no, who made it the state religion, because in 313 Constantine legalized Christianity. It was Theodosius that made it the state religion of the
Yeah.
Roman Empire. So I don't know if it's the same Theodosius, but there was a monastery attached to this, and he was there as a young monk. So again, you've got famous names, famous figures associated with this place, right?
Yeah.
And also, um, I mean, it's just so they tried to have the rock moved to Constantinople. Now, why would you cut a piece of that rock and try to move it to the site of Constantinople, which is the Eastern Roman Church? Why would you do that if it's just a lame place that no one cares about? Again, it had to be important.
Yeah.
Makes sense, bro.
Yeah, it's the well. Obviously, they're treating that stone as a very important relic in connection with Mary. So it's like, what's the word? I think they call this type of relic first class relic. You know,
Right. So
associated with a really important saint. Yeah.
correct. So it was placed in the Church of the Resurrection, right behind the tomb of Jesus, where it was used for the Eucharist. Does this tell you this is an insignificant item? No, this was
No.
clearly
No.
revered.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Understand? So all of this, when you take all of this together, this church was very, very important,
Yeah.
right? Now, the octagon shape of the church can be seen in other early churches, like St. Peter's House in Capernaum, Mount Gerizim. So the idea is there, the Dome of the Rock, but the Dome of the Rock comes late. Okay, as we all know, it's the oldest church in the world, right after the Kaaba. You know, so St. Peter's House, obviously, this is St. Peter's mother-in-law's house. Okay, the man was lowered through the roof here. This idea, right? But this house also happens to be octagonal, right? An
Oh.
octagon with a circle with a rock in the middle, as you can see,
Yeah.
with pillars. So obviously, this idea is obviously from a very Christian idea. Then it makes it into the Cathisma Church, and then it becomes common in other buildings, and the Dome of the Rock steals the idea. I mean, again, this is clearly a Christian idea that the Dome of the Rock steals. Why would they do that? Why would they take a Christian design, Mel?
Well, it speaks to the idea that Islam has come from Christianity in some way, even if it's a kind of a hybrid between Judaism and Christianity. It's drawing from Christian traditions as much as Jewish traditions.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So let me continue here. I mean, you can see this is the Dome of the Rock. I mean, and also the idea of cisterns, water as well. This is so common here, and you have a cistern at the Cathisma, right? So the Cathisma well, they found a clay water pipe near the rock, and early tradition says a miraculous spring appeared there to quench Mary's thirst. And a 6th century account tells of pilgrims drinking sweet water, exactly like Zamzam. Pilgrims could remove up to 4 liters of water from the holy water well to take with them, exactly like Zamzam, right? So you've got to see this. I mean, so there's lots of papers on this I discovered. It took me a while, but so she's one of the original archaeologists who were there when the site was discovered. She went out and she had a look at it in 92, and she went back a couple of other times. So this is what Muslims do. So
I
now,
can imagine if they were setting up Mecca in the 8th century and they have this fantastic well in Jerusalem, they're going to want to have that in Mecca as well. They're going to have something on the level of that to kind of to make Mecca worth visiting, you know.
yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. You've got these parallels here, and then it's
Yeah.
copied into Mecca. So let me run through. Then of course you've got, so this thing is this. There's an Ottoman period, so it seems in the Ottoman period this was known. Okay, so there's some stuff related to that, and there's the water hole is still there. They dug it open and made it much bigger to do some research on it and for some
Yeah.
archaeological research. And of course, notice here, according to tradition, the wise men also witnessed the star when they camped at the Cathisma well,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So again, you've got another major issue around the nativity that is associated with this place, right?
Yeah.
So now, whether or not this was the original nativity shrine or whatever, but the fact is, you've got all of these connections. They cannot be coincidence. You know, you've just got too many
Yeah.
connections. You know, it just was historically too important. They dug this open to start to look for archaeological stuff, and they found that this site was attracting attention all the way up into the Middle Ages, including the Ottoman period. So it wasn't left
Yeah.
alone. It was well known and then disappeared.
Yeah. Interesting.
Let's see. Okay, this Ramat Rachel also, it is part of an area that is very critical to the Old Testament. So you've got this mountain wall, and so this is part of the hill of Rachel from the Old Testament. So this area, it's also part of Jacob. So this whole place, the place where it's at, is related to Jacob and Rachel and so on. So it's very, very important to the Jews as well from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And it is known as a martyrium, a witness to the faith. It was more than just a church. It's a martyrium, a structure intended to bear witness to the Christian faith by commemorating an event in the life of Christ, of a martyr or other holy person. The size is nearly the same size as the Dome of the Rock, built more than
Oh.
230 years later. I mean, that was not a tiny church. Your
Yeah.
thoughts, Mel?
Yeah. Yeah, I think your case is really strong of a connection between the two. Like you could argue there are other churches around the world that are eight-sided at the time, but you have so many other things there that's connecting the two that you cannot just dismiss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so what you've got is that it escaped destruction during the Persian and Islamic conquest of the 7th century. Although apparently, remember, there was the one reference in 641. It was damaged, if not destroyed. There's a prayer niche facing Mecca that was used as a mosque in the 8th century.
Mhm.
Experts speculate that this may have been one of the few churches that was shared by Christians and Muslims during the Arab period. And yeah, and let's see. So the clay water pipe. Let's see, the Proto-Evangelion of James. This is well known. So obviously this now becomes an apocryphal story, which puts all these miraculous events that happen there. The Bible
Yeah.
just mentions the following. And they came into the middle of the road, and Mary said to him, "Take me down off the ass, for that which is in me presses to come forth." And he took it down from off the ass and said to her, "Whither shall I lead thee and cover thy disgrace? For the place is desert." Now, isn't that odd? Because, Hagar gets to a place that is desert.
Yes. Yeah. And
No.
they're in a panic to get water.
Yes. What is the next verse after this? So, I should look at the next verse. Actually, it'll be very.
Yeah.
I didn't put the biblical reference to this. Oh my good grief, that was weak of me. What is the next reference? Because we should look at the following verse and see what it says. That might be interesting.
Mm.
Can someone tell me what the next verse is? Let me actually you know what? I'm just going to look this up on Google quickly. I'm going to do a Mr. Google here.
Okay.
So
I think this is the
Proto-Evangelion.
This
is in the Proto-Evangelion. My bad. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and he found a cave there. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm just saying that like this part of the story here is the real clincher. The parallel is so strong between Ishmael and Hagar and Mary looking for water at the well and so forth.
Okay, so let's have a look here. So for the place is desert, and he found a cave there and led her into it. So Mel, does that ring any bells? I mean, does that?
Are you suggesting a connection with the Hira cave?
I don't know, but
No.
it's just that, like, oh, here's a cave idea. Hey, we got a cave too. We need to stick a cave in somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just it seems like every little motif is being duplicated. Got a well, you got a cave. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from the Proto-Evangelion of James, and then in this infancy narrative, Mary is the daughter of a wealthy but long childless couple. Okay. And this idea seems to be stolen after the story of Elkanah and Hannah and their son Samuel in 1 Samuel 1-2. Now, if these stories can take from the Old Testament, then there's no reason that Islam couldn't take from these stories.
Yeah.
Right? The borrowing. And of course, Mary lives as a ward of the temple. There's other stories that Islam has taken as well. For instance, where a dove comes out, okay, where Mary is fed by birds. Now, there's this story as well from these stories, which Islam also takes over.
Yeah.
So this is just odd. I mean, it's really, really odd. And,
actually, just on that, Mary is a ward of the temple. I'm thinking about how the Quran connects Mary to the sister of Aaron, and a sister of Aaron being the priest. Priest works in the temple. A connection between Mary as ward of the temple would fit nicely with her being associated with the sister of Aaron. Another Semitic symmetry there.
So, I mean, this idea apparently, now Odon thinks that tradition of Mary as sister of Aaron was shared among early Aramaic Christians, right? Because let me see here. Let me just see what he says on this point. For Jewish Christians who lived by the tradition of the Torah and the Targumim, the Targums, there was an obvious analogy with Miriam, the prophet, okay, the prophetess, daughter of Imran, sister of Aaron, and Moses, right, whose prayer had God give the miracle of water to the people in the desert during the Exodus. Okay, the Jewish tradition about the wells of Mara and Elim in the Tosefta. Moreover, that miraculous water flowed from a miraculous rock that moved along with the people, which was identified with Jesus in the first century. As Paul explains in 1 Corinthians 10, I do not want to be unaware, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud. They passed through the sea. They were baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea. And they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. So there is this story, again, from the Jewish sources that the Muslims are probably copying.
And actually, Pseudo-Jonathan mentions that story of Miriam's well as well, that link. So also Pseudo-Jonathan suggests that the function of the well in Jewish thinking was that it proves the veracity of the prophets. It has that aspect, which obviously could have been very useful when they're trying to prove that Muhammad was a genuine prophet. You'd need a well that's plentiful with water to make that case, according to the Jewish thinking.
Yeah. So now you've got multiple sources. Now remember the idea of this church, the idea of Mary as the sister of Aaron, right? Obviously is associated with this location and with this church. I'm not saying the church pushed that idea. The church did not. Although some people, I think, have said that the church is the source of this and the church is pushing this whole apocryphal idea. But the idea from the Proto-Evangelion of James, and there's another apocryphal gospel that says similar things as well, that pushes these ideas. They associate themselves to this church, right? And the Muslims obviously are not using Orthodox Christianity, and therefore they are taking from these ideas, as I've got here. So I mean, so again, you've got another connection to this church, which is another connection to the Targums of all things as well. And this is now made its way into Islam. And notice, he's an old man and she's a young virgin. Now, hold on, let me think. Hold on, Mel, help me out here. Do you know of can you think of a religion? I'm just,
Yeah, I think I might have heard this every time I've ever visited Speaker's Corner. It's probably one of the top things Muslims say. Oh, well, Mary was like really young and Joseph was like 90-year-old.
Yeah, but hold on. Now, hold on. I'll put this to the audience. Am I making sense? I mean, all of these connections, literally over a dozen so far, not just 5, but we're talking multiples of solid historical connections.
Yeah.
I mean, this is making sense. And here you've got an old man with a young virgin, and here you've got a guy thinking, "Oh, that's some holy stuff over there. I need to be an old dude, and I need to get me a young virgin because that's what the Jews did."
Yeah.
Mal, I mean, I'm not saying Mo was necessarily, shall we say, mentally well balanced, but I mean, do you think they might have taken on this idea and said, "Okay, well, that's good stuff. We'll do the same."
Yeah, it looks like they're kind of almost gone wrong. But that story, we must include that one. That's a real story to remember. It does look like it's just been grabbed and said, right, we'll have that. Especially if they had a mosque there for goodness knows how long, a few centuries. Of course, they're going to imbibe all of the legends and stories and myths from that location and bring it into Islam.
Yeah, there's a
Especially,
question. Well, was this a place for baptism? I don't know. I mean, we can guess, but I don't know for sure.
well, before Islam, definitely. Yeah, all churches would have been, mightn't have been its primary function, but definitely churches were all, well, can I say that? Maybe I might be wrong in the early centuries, but I think a lot of the churches would have had baptism.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've
Stand
got
corrected.
all of these links. I mean, again, just back to this one. I mean, I need to probably include this story into the slideshow as well to talk about the mystical sort of connotation, or the old Jewish link to it as well. And then, of course, let me just finish up here. This is like only a couple of slides left.
Yeah.
They speak here of, so Jesus speaks from her tummy, and open from your roots a vein of water which has been hidden in the earth. Here's the well, the original well, this little picture here.
Yeah.
And they began to come forth a spring of water, exceedingly clear and cool and sparkling. And they say the same thing about the Zamzam well, right?
Yeah.
So these ideas, I mean, many of these ideas, again, like you were talking about the late date of something, the earliest manuscript source is 820 AD. This is the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. However, we know that these ideas were around at least in the 7th century and even much, much earlier.
Yeah.
So it's possible that you can't find any solid ideas, but you can find relationships to things much, much hundreds of years before.
Yeah.
And so again, you've got the very same ideas in the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, which make their way into Islam, right? And in the Quran, she conceives him and withdrew to a remote place, and the throes of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a palm tree. She said, "Oh, would that I had died before this," right? And the Lord has provided a stream beneath thee, and shake towards you the trunk of the palm tree. It will drop thee fresh, ripe dates. And we saw at this church, they've got a palm tree heavy with dates. So eat and drink and cool the eye. If thou seest any mortal, say, surely I've blah, blah, blah. Hold on. Let me just go here. So let me just go back to the very first slide. Notice here again, I'm going to bring
Yes.
this up nice and big. This is the Islamic palm tree, heavy with dates.
Yeah. It's
At this
pointing to
church.
that story.
At this church. Yes, sorry? No?
Yeah, it's definitely pointing to that specific story that you just read.
So let me see. Let me just continue. So the Dome of the Rock. So there's lots of research on this. Okay. There's a month that the early Byzantine history of the road leading south loomed large as a holy itinerary. In fact, I mean, so what they're saying is here that the road Jerusalem to Bethlehem was a major route of pilgrimage, and you had to go past this church. The church is literally on the road.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, there's all of this solid archaeological, historical evidence. There's all of this stuff. There's no way to discount it. I mean, so this place was very important.
Yeah, just point out something from my knowledge of the Camino in Spain, which is another major pilgrimage route. The pilgrimage route was typically designed to go past all of the significant churches, and part of the pilgrim's task really was to visit each church on the way. So this makes perfect sense to me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair and well. So I mean, actually, I'm really glad we're having this. That's why I invited you the very first time, to talk, but you weren't able to make it. But I mean, now suddenly you are filling in blanks. You're giving me confirmations.
Yeah.
That I'm not just barking up the wrong tree here. There are too many. There are far too many of these things.
Yeah.
And let's continue. We're nearly done. 1 or 2 slides. So Adam dug the well of Zamzam with his foot to provide water. No. No, there they found the Well of Zamzam. Didn't have to dig anything. They found it by a miracle. But if it was just standing there and it was famous, why would they have to look for it and find it?
Yeah.
Hagar founded the Well of Zamzam by watching from the hill of Asafa as a bird scratched the earth. Okay, fine and well.
Well, hold on. Just go back a second. Mount Safa is Mount Scopus in Jerusalem.
Yes, I know that, but no, yeah. But a bird was scratching the earth. I don't know what size this bird was. It must have been mighty big feet, right? Size 52 feet. In Mujahid's narrative, the angel Jibril dug out the Zamzam well with his heel. In another story, an angel uses its wing. Then Abdul Muttalib rediscovers the Well of Zamzam, but apparently, okay, it was never lost. It was the oldest city in the world. Okay, fine. And then the mother of Ismail, Hagar, hunts up Safa Hill. Not. Okay, hold on. Notice here she ran up. Notice here she goes up Safa. Okay. Now in this one, she runs up Safa Hill and then to Marwa, and then she looks from Marwa and she sees an angel digging a hole in the ground. Now she's on the other hill, right?
Yeah.
Then, of course, water pours forth from the Zamzam wellspring. This is not ascribed to an angel, but to the baby Ismail. I've got another story where an angel is literally digging a hole with the tip of its wing. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Do you know what would be interesting, actually, if we were to bring up a map of Jerusalem with Mount Scopus and Mount Marwa or Mount Moriah, and see where the church is in relation to that? I bet you probably find that it's closer to the Temple Mount than it is to Safa, because Safa is sort of the northeast of the Temple Mount.
Hold on.
And if my geography is right, the Temple Mount, or sorry, the Cathisma Church would be southwest of the Temple Mount, so therefore it would be closer. So that story makes a lot of sense in the context of Jerusalem.
Okay, so let's actually do this. Since you're here, I mean, while you're here, do you think we should just do this quickly?
Oh yeah, let's do it. Yeah, because this could be great.
I have tried on Google Maps about 4 times to have this pin moved to here on Google Maps. I use Google Earth a lot, but on Google Maps, and they refuse to move the freaking pin. It annoys the living daylights out of me. Okay, so I'm going to call this one Cathisma.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to make this one. Okay, I'm just going to give it a rice, just so it's visible. Okay, just cool. Temporarily. So okay,
if you go, I think if you go north, let's predict this. I think it's northeast from there. You get the Temple Mount. Let's just see. Let's see, where is it?
Okay, so here we are, and then Temple Mount. So okay, I'm going to mark the Temple Mount.
Yeah. So I think the Temple Mount is between it and Mount Scopus. That's my view.
Okay, so I'm going to mark the Temple Mount now.
Oh, this is exciting. We're literally discovering things live here on air.
Sorry, so I need to...
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the Temple Mount marked now.
Okay. And then just sort of a little bit further northeast from there, you should have Mount Scopus, let's say.
Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah.
Mount Scopus, here we come. There we go.
Yeah, exactly. Oh wow, this is going
okay. I'm going to drop it here. Okay, I'll just drop it there.
Yeah.
Oh, Mount Scopus. Yeah. Okay, close enough. And where is Mount? What's the other one? Mount Moriah.
Yeah, look at that. So as I it's still quite a bit out, but you can see that. So the top 10.
Sorry.
Top 10 is Mount Scopus, then there's the Temple Mount, and then down the bottom is Cathisma. So the Temple Mount will be closer to Cathisma than the other. Yeah. It's almost like a straight line between the three, if you notice.
Yeah, I'm just going to say Cathisma. What did I do earlier? I messed something up. Okay, Cathisma. That's crazy, because now you have, I mean, from here.
Talking about 5 kilometers, something like that.
Well, looking at 5Ks, but if you continue this line,
probably another kilometer. Maybe.
What I wanted to draw was a line. Let me just do this.
This is brilliant.
I mean, 3 in a straight line. So I mean, that's what you've got. You just happen to have a.
Couldn't get a straighter line, like, considering that's just kind of random, but it's very close to a straight line.
I mean, that's a pretty straight line running along the side of these things, like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, if you look here, you've got this one, then this one, then this one. This is definitely a very straight line. If
Yeah.
I put my line, let me get my line again. Put it literally on target. So I'll place it here.
That looks pretty straight to me, doesn't it?
Pretty close.
Yeah, pretty close. Just slightly off of the Temple Mount. But
It's close enough. It's look, it does cross the Temple Mount. It does cross the
yeah,
Temple Mount. Look at that.
yeah. Amazing.
It crosses the temple. In fact, it bisects the Temple Mount corner to corner.
Yeah, yeah,
Look at that. It's actually bisecting it.
yeah. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque would have been in that corner as well. Wasn't it?
So I mean, this is a coincidence. I don't know, but
Yeah. Actually, if you go back to that description, the very last one before we looked at, because if you kind
which
of,
one?
okay, so it runs up, let's say,
Sorry,
Ishmael runs up to the Safa hill, and then, no, what was it?
this one,
No,
yeah, the bottom one here, yeah.
and then up to Al Marwa, which would be Mount Moriah Hill, to look for help, but in vain. And that's where the Zamzam is seen. Okay, and then sees an angel. Now it's still 5 kilometers, but it's definitely from Al Marwa, which is Mount Moriah. It's definitely closer than Safa Hill.
So where's
To
Mount
get
Moriah?
So Mount Moriah is actually the Temple Mount, which is the central red one. Okay.
Okay, so that is Mount Moriah.
Yeah. So it's basically saying they went from the Mount Scopus, which is the top red one, then to the Temple Mount or Al Marwa.
So
And
yeah,
then
so
now it's a bit of a distance to the well from there, but still it's kind of it
4.8
makes logical
kilometers, yeah.
sense.
I
Still
measured it
makes
before.
logical sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, but that's, I mean, so that's that. So then there are other stories as well. I mean, this is just a small selection. And
Yeah.
then Ismail, he'll wax the ground and he brings up this thing.
Yeah. I just
So
want to
now,
respond to just one comment here for a second. Is this channel an Islamic channel? No, we're just looking at the origins of Islam. We're not an Islamic channel.
yeah.
Okay, back to you there.
So you
Sorry.
would look over Jerusalem to Mount Scopus. From the church, you would look over Jerusalem to Mount Scopus. Well, that's probably true. Actually, let's go have a look. But then again, I mean, so let's have a
Yeah.
look here. The road has always run in this direction. It's basically, here we are. Let's actually go stand in the road next to this place.
Yeah, that would be.
So here's the church on our right, literally next to the road.
Yeah.
And where
Yeah.
would be?
So straight ahead, presumably, if it's in the right direction.
Yeah, on Google Maps, you can zoom in. On Google Earth, you can't. It moves you forward. If we do this, sorry, let me just go back here. It's slightly ahead to the left. Okay, so I need to go.
Yeah, on Google Earth, you could create it like a 3D view, low to the ground, but.
So it's going to be slightly ahead to the left. So you can't see it, but it's going to be like roughly in this direction here or here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty
Because
cool.
the church is right there. So yeah, I mean, so it's ahead roughly in this direction. You can't see it now, but yeah.
Yeah.
So then the final slide I have is so the Quran has it in 3 places: Surah 346, 5110, and 1922. Okay, so what is the relationship between the cave of Cathisma? And I need to bring up this last document here. I'll bring this up. I translated this from the Dutch. The Quran, Cathisma, and the child is spoke in the manger. All right.
Yeah.
And the clay bird thing is so attached to the mythical story. Okay, is the clay bird story, right? In Pseudo-Matthew, because Pseudo-Matthew also has elements of this story in it, and the Quran obviously copies Pseudo-Matthew.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Pseudo-Matthew and not Pseudo-Jonathan, good grief. Even the Proto-Evangelion of James both have this. The Church of Cathisma, right? And of course, Mary becomes important because she gave birth to the Son of God. And then, of course, it says here that you've got the cave of treasures, and then the final conclusion. Let's just finish the conclusion. We may conclude, where was this? The Quran is linked to Assyrian, Palestinian, Christology, theology, or Christian theology centered around the Ark of the Covenant and the Cave of Treasures. The purpose of this theology was to emphasize the continuity of revelation, beginning with Adam and the prophets in the Old Testament through paradise and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the Ark of the Covenant, and the Temple of Jerusalem to the Blessed Virgin Theotokos and the Ark of the Covenant. Now,
She's
the reason
the
is
new Ark
that
of the Covenant. Yeah, yeah.
she becomes the Ark of the Covenant. You see,
Yeah.
So she becomes so. So hold on. It says this. Let me see. Sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, no. So the Byzantine Church, to celebrate the status of the Virgin during that feast, Mary assumes the role of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is embedded in the rock of the Cathisma in another legend, since then the Ark and the body of the Virgin are one.
That makes sense. That's another Semitic symmetry, bringing the two concepts together.
Now,
Yeah.
remember I mentioned that on the stream when I mentioned you. I said the Semitic symmetry thing because it was making sense to me as well.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, this again, I mean, there's just one coincidence after the next. This cannot be accidental. Well, the next part of this is when I want to have a look. I'm doing some notes here on the Dome of the Rock itself. I want to do some more looking at the Dome of the Rock itself. So that's my story, Mel.
That is absolutely brilliant. I think that flowed even better than the first time I saw it. Maybe it's because I'm more familiar with the material the second time around, but that makes a lot of sense. And there's so much overlapping, and I think the looking at it from the Google map really sort of helps, kind of make sense of it. I love maps, and I think maps really kind of make it visually understandable. So that's brilliant. I think the last thing we're going to do is look at the origin of the name Zamzam, and I'm glad that you mentioned about the Zimzam. So I'm just going to go into that, and then we can round up with a little bit of discussion at the end. So I'll be fairly quick on this one. So the origin of the name Zamzam. This is one of those things. I was in bed one night. Let me go back a second. And I just got an inspiration to pick up my phone and look for an 8th century Chinese source that might fill in the gaps. It's just like an instinct, because I'd looked at Chinese sources before, and I said, oh, what if there was another one? And I found one that actually delivered quite a lot for one source. So it is, actually I probably picked the wrong one to introduce, but the Chinese source is Du Huan, which is mentioned there. And in the source, it refers to these two locations, which refer to Sudan and Eritrea and Abyssinia. And so this is a Chinese guy he was involved in a war between the Chinese and the Arabs in the 750s. He got taken by the Arabs. He became a prisoner of war as such. He speaks pretty well of his experience, considering he's a prisoner of war, so they didn't treat him too badly, as it seemed. And then he wrote about it, and it got included in an encyclopedia. So that's kind of the background very quickly. Let's go to now. Let me see if I can increase the size of this so I can't actually read it here. This doesn't work too well. Let me just see. Can I increase it to full screen? Oh, that's a bit better. So he talks about He talks about this place called Yang Saluo, and scholars say that this is a reference to Jerusalem. We also went to Molan, southwest of Jerusalem. One reaches this country after having crossed the Great Desert and having traveled 2,000 li. So he's obviously referring to East Africa now. The people are black, their customs rough. There is little rice and cereals, and there's no grass and trees. The horses are fed with dried fish. The people eat word not identified, and also Persian dates. And let's just go on to the key stuff. I may have to come out of full screen again. So this is the bit that I thought was very interesting. He talks about the followers of the Confession of the Dashi, which actually is the Chinese rendering of Tayaye. And there's a few things that doesn't make much sense, but I'll just read it in brief. They have a means to denote the degrees of family relations, but it is degenerated and they don't bother about it. Not sure what that means. They don't eat the meat of pigs, dogs, donkeys, and horses. They don't respect neither the king of the country, neither their parents. They don't believe in supernatural powers. Now, I'm a bit puzzled by that because I would have thought they would, but maybe from the Chinese perspective, it might be that they don't believe in the, things like chi energy or things that Chinese might have believed in. So it's kind of more superstitious type stuff.
Remember
Um,
that thing I sent you yesterday? Um,
I have actually some of that in the slides, actually.
about Warakus? Remember I sent you about Warakus?
No, I don't think no, I haven't got that in here.
Hold on, if I may just share my screen for 1 second, it will be
Yeah,
very.
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
maybe you, hold on, are you able to show it to anyone?
I don't. I only have it on my phone. I don't have it on my computer, unfortunately.
Okay, wait, maybe I can quickly show it to people, but I mean,
Yeah.
again, there's no. Okay, I'll just be very brief here, but this is Waraka, right? Who tells Muhammad
Oh, sorry.
he's.
Let me just share it. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So when you look up Waraka, I found this in relation to that Warakus, dissolute, one who does not observe the proprieties, and dissolute means one who is lax in morals.
Right. Yeah.
This is this is obviously taken from, so Waraka, I was looking in the gears for Waraka, about Waraka.
Yeah.
And this is one who lacks morals, one who is lax in morals, who does not
Yeah.
observe the regulations, the rules, the moral laws or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, like, okay, is there something here, And now you're talking about people who break all the moral laws. I mean, is there a relationship? Is there a link? That's
Yeah.
just my question. So you can
Yeah.
stop sharing. I'll stop sharing again.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just put it out there.
There you go.
Okay. Right. So they don't believe in supernatural powers. They perform sacrifice to heaven and to no one else. Now, this bit is interesting. According to their customs, every 7th day is a holiday. Right. So 7th day, presumably that's Sunday. So they're treating Sunday as an important day of rest, essentially, on which no trade and no cash transactions are done. Okay. So you remember you spoke about the Muslims and Christians sharing the Church of the Cathisma.
Mm-hmm.
This would make more sense if Friday hasn't taken on the significance it has in modern Islam, and Sunday is still the important day for them. And this bit is a massive hole in the narrative of Islam, which is, whereas when they drink alcohol, they are behaving in a ridiculous and undisciplined way during the whole day. So it's basically based on his observation of the Dashi, the Tayaye, or the Arabs as we might call them. They don't seem to have any rule against drinking alcohol, especially getting absolutely hammered. Is basically what is being described here. Now, it takes a lot to get a reputation that the people are constantly getting drunk. There's some nations in the world that get that reputation, but you have to be drinking pretty hard for an outsider to come in and say that they've noticed this and they're behaving in a ridiculous and undisciplined way. So that kind of fits in with the Waraka that you just mentioned about being what you call dissolute, I think the word was.
Right, dissolute, dissolute,
Yeah.
lax in morals.
Yeah. So in the paper, let me just see. Is this something I want to mention? No, I don't need to. Let's skip that bit. Okay. Oh yeah. So this gives us a little bit more. Let me just get rid of that. Okay. I want to focus on the last bit. So it's referring to East Africa here, but it says they have 3 confessions. The Arab, which I think in Chinese it was the Dashi. Okay. Now it's funny, for centuries the Chinese referred to Islam as the religion of the Tayaye or the Dashi. So in 751, they referred to whatever that religion was at that time. They referred to simply as the Dashi. Okay. here for Byzantine, I presume what's been referred to here as the equivalent of the East Roman is probably Fulin that they use in Chinese. And then Zamzam, which is Zoroastrianism. Okay, so you mentioned about the Zamzam in relation to the Zamzam well earlier. The Zamzam practice incest, and in this respect are worse of all the barbarians. Now, it's interesting when we look at the Hadiths and you look at how sexually immoral they are, all the different stories that seem to celebrate all this kind of weird sexual proclivities. According to this 751 witness account, it isn't the Arabs that are guilty of this. It seems to be associated with Zoroastrianism. Now, this is a big surprise to me because I haven't heard of any of this with Zoroastrianism. Like their texts seem to be fairly normal. There's nothing weird in it. So there must be something here on this one. What else? Just very quick to move on. So in a paper that I looked at, we got this, the Zamzam, or spelled differently. This is an Arabic term in a strict sense, meaning the Zoroastrians of Persia. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Snow.
Also, they've got the fountain of Well of Zamzam, which is in the Hidayah, which is situated to the east of the Kaaba. So the term Zamzam is definitely associated with the Kaaba and the well.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, so this is really, really odd.
Yeah. Persians might have imparted their Zoroastrian creed to some of the coastal people, hence the use of that word Zamzam in East Africa. So the Zoroastrians, obviously, they were ruling Yemen for a while, and they would have had some influence on East Africa as well. Early Islamic sources uses the terms in Arabic Zamzama and Zamazima to refer to the religious rites of Zoroastrianism and the Zoroastrians. So we have actual confirmation of that idea that there is a Zoroastrian connection with the word Zamzam. The terms are onomatopoeic and derive from what Arabs perceive to be an indistinct droning sound of the recitation of the Avestan prayers and scriptures of Magi, in other words, the Zoroastrians. And actually, it's interesting in Hebrew, the word Zamzam it also refers to like a buzzing sound associated with gurgling water. So you have that kind of sense of kind of a droning or humming sound. And then finally, Zamzama, the confused noise of distant thunder, according to Lane, but widely used in the sources for early Islamic history for the priests of the Magians reciting and intoning the Zoroastrian prayers and scriptures, producing to the Arab's ear an indistinct droning sound. And there's use of that word in Al-Tabri, 1042, the Zamzama of the Herbads, which I think is a place in Iran. And then in 2874, the Muzazim, Muzamzim, are adherent of Zoroastrianism. And then in 2880, Zamzama for the Zoroastrian rites, and Zamazima for the Magians in general. So I think there is a really strong piece of evidence here that the Zamzam well is named after Zoroastrianism, which opens up a whole pile of questions like why of all things have they got Zoroastrianism connected to the Zamzam well? So we have those Christian sources of the well being copied, but somehow they've morphed it, the two things together.
But also it says here Zamzama in early Arabic, the confused noise of distant thunder from Lane, but widely used in the sources for early Islamic history for the priests of the Magians reciting and intoning Zoroastrian prayers and scriptures. Adherent of. Okay, so you've got the same reference. It's in the encyclopedia.
Yeah, same one. Yeah. So I think this is pretty damaging.
But hold on, the term may have passed into Christian Sogdian texts, probably in the early Islamic period, as ZM. Well, let me look up ZM. Okay. That's interesting. Let me see what it finds. ZM. Zamzama again. No, it doesn't find anything. Let me see. Oh, there's a link in the Ge'ez.
Yeah.
Let me see what it brings up. I'm just trying to find
Okay.
it. Just waiting for it.
Yeah. No
Takes
problem.
a moment to.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, this particular book, I don't know. It's very slow when it indexes this book.
Yeah.
Okay, resound. To resound. ZM. Yeah. So to resound, and then it's got another word Zema. 638. So Zema. I'm going to find Zema within the. So Zema is harmony in song within the Ge'ez. Zema, song. Yeah.
Song. Did I hear right? Song.
Song, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's some sort of vocalization, whether it be prayers or song.
Harmony in music, harmony in song, yeah.
Yeah. Could be associated as well with kind of like chanting.
Rhythm, okay, they also have rhythm, swaying of a prayer stick in time to music.
Yeah. Wow.
So definitely, yeah, there's some sort of, so it could well be incantation, chanting, as well as, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows?
So I suppose the big question is, well, I think the borrowing of the idea of why there's a well there is clearly from where you mentioned from Jerusalem. But then there's a big question of why did they give it a Zoroastrian name? Was that location in Mecca visited by Iranians, by Persians? Maybe during the period when Iran was first invaded by the Arabs, and there was a time when there was a coexistence between the two groups, and maybe there was a greater tolerance, and so Persians were visiting this newly founded location of Mecca, and rather than falling into line and following whatever Islam was in those early days, they were doing their own thing, and they were going to the well and practicing their own beliefs, and over time they eventually became fully Muslim, but left that name associated well. That's just one idea I have. I don't know what others think.
Well, look, I've seen references and I've spoken about this briefly. I've meant to go and look it up further, but
Yeah,
so they were called the believers. Remember, they were called the mu'minin,
yeah,
right? They were the believers, the mu'minin. Now, I just need to mention that. So, mu is a prefix, right? It's an Arabic prefix, one who does whatever the next word is. So, a mu carpenter would be someone who does carpentry, right? Mu
yeah,
plumber, and a Muslim is one who does slim, which is, which is whatever Muslims do, right? But that said, the mu'minin, the manin is Arabic, and it's very, very similar to the Hebrew term menim, which is a plural of heretic, because min is heretic, menim is many heretics. So the ones who practice heresy, they were called heretics, and they took the name on, just like Christians were called Christians by their detractors, and they took the name Christian. They said, okay, fine, it fits. If
yeah.
the shoe fits, wear it. The Muslims took on the name the Mu'minin, but eventually they adopted there was an Umayyad group that was a minor family, a minor royal family or something. They used the term Muslim, and the primary term was Mu'minin. But then the Abbasids took over, and what happens is they took this name of this group who called themselves the Muslims, and they adopted that name to give them a separate identity from the ecumenical group of Messianic Jews, Christians, believers in the one God, and they separated out as a group, and they took the term Muslim
Yeah,
from this Umayyad group.
yeah. I think there was probably in the early 8th century there was probably a desire to become more confessional in the sense of distinguishing the in group and the out group.
Yeah, exactly. Now, La Infamia says Aslam means to surrender. Sure, it does in many languages, but the very earliest use of the SLM root is actually for the astrological god Shalim. Muslims forget to mention that they speak of salam, they speak of to surrender, salam, peace and all that, but they forget that the very earliest use of it was actually the worship of the moon god or the star god, Shalem.
Another thing that strikes me, and I'm not a linguist, so if there's linguists watching, you can say what you think on this one. But this word here, Muzamzim, when I first read it, it reminded me of the word muezzin, the person who calls to prayer. Is there an etymological link there, or is it just...
mu is a prefix within the Arabic? One who does whatever the next word denotes.
Yeah.
So one who does Zamzam. Actually, let me look up Zamzam. See if I can find any references in my sources to it.
So the muezzin.
Nothing.
That double Z is interesting because it kind of reminds me of Zamzam.
So hold on, wait. Muezzin, music, intonation. So the muezzin sings, harmony, singing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Zimzim, right, from the Ethiopic.
Yeah. Maybe that's maybe where the overlap occurs. Maybe it's just that they borrowed a term because there was a chant to call to prayer, and the fact that it's linked to Zoroastrian, maybe it's just a coincidence. Would that be fair?
It's hard to look. We don't want to just blindly speculate, but I mean, at some point you need to start connecting things because there's. We were digging far back in the past. It's not. It's not like there's a bunch of Polaroids and a 4K video waiting to be discovered. So you're going to have to sort of put things together and see if they fit, right? And see if there's evidence for it.
I did find a 14th century Chinese source that refers to the Zamzam well. So at least we can say that the mythology around the Zamzam well was established by then.
But then, singing can also mean incantations. Again, as Deduzo asked, could this be to do with magic? It could be to do with also one who recites incantations.
Yeah. So that brings back that, that whole area that you brought up a few weeks ago. I don't know, was it Unreasoned Answers that you were going into the magical dimension? Yeah.
There's a lot of connections to magic and the occult.
Yeah. Well, so maybe just to invite people to leave their thoughts in the comments below. I think this was a good session. I think we definitely covered a lot of ground, a lot of areas there to kind of reevaluate things. So listen, Lloyd, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on board here. I know it's been a long session, and I hope I didn't. I am
a little bushed, to be quite honest.
Yeah. So listen, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone in the audience for logging in and watching us this evening. And
thanks, guys.
We'll see you all very soon. Now let me see if I can.
Good night, guys. Take care. Thank you. God bless.